Boy Meets a Random Out-of-Body Experience by Natasha Romanov, official, A Shade of Green. Chapter 2. Typical Ghost Stuff. The elevator doors opened and Peter silently followed Nat, Sam, Steve and Bucky into the sitting room on the top floor, the Avengers common room. Inside sat the rest of the Avengers, talking and laughing and just enjoying each other's company. Peter felt kind of bad about the fact that he was going to completely destroy the calm atmosphere that everyone had probably been waiting for. But hey, they were the Avengers. It was kind of hard for things not to be exciting with them. Also, Peter realised, I could be dead. That should be a good excuse to break the peace. He let his mind skirt around the I am dead to the more calming idea of maybe I'm dead. He stood for a minute watching his family sit and chat, wondering how to get their attention. He didn't want to start out with any violent or property-damaging stunts, but felt that he may have to resort to it. Or maybe they'll just notice I'm not here and start looking, Peter said loudly and hopefully. As if Thor had actually heard Peter, but was pretending he wasn't there, he loudly addressed the whole group, asking, Where's Peter? I thought he was going to be here tonight. Peter's heart jumped, and so did he. He landed on the coffee table in the middle of the room. I'm right here! Everybody turned to Tony, who rolled his eyes and promptly reassured them all. He lives here, of course he's going to be here. He just has decathlon practice tonight. He'll be back in... He checked his watch. 3-ish hours? Peter's jaw dropped. How could he have already forgotten? He hadn't told Tony that he was skipping so that he could surprise him. They wouldn't be expecting him for 3 more hours. 3 hours before he didn't show up and they realised maybe he's in trouble. Decathlon practice? He plays sports now? Steve asked, sitting up straighter. No, academic decathlon, Rhodey said. It's like trivia night with actual trophies, Tony interrupted to give the oversimplified definition. I don't think I completely understand, but okay. Steve sat back into his chair. That is not what it is, Peter said, shaking his head at his mentor. He slumped when he remembered his situation and kicked one of the magazines on the table in exasperation. It slid to the floor, pages flipping and thwapping together in a loud and obnoxious fashion. Everybody's head turned to the magazine, now laying in a pitiful heap on the floor. Did you guys see that? Happy asked. Everyone nodded. Peter looked around excitedly. He had finally gotten their attention. He kicked another magazine and it sailed off the table and onto the floor. The Avengers stared, not sure whether to be tense or amused. This would be the kind of funny if we could be sure it wasn't some invisible assassin waiting to ambush us, Wanda said, voicing their thoughts from her seat in the corner next to Vision, who spoke up. I can't hear or sense anyone. Was that you? Clint looked to Scott. Did you turn tiny and move them? What? No. Are you sure? Guys, it's just some magazines on the floor. It's fine. If it was some psycho who wanted to kill you, they probably would have already started killing, Pepper reasoned. She stood up. I'm going to order food. Happy, can you help me? She said over her shoulder as she left the room. Happy followed her out of the room without protest. Probably just trying to get away from the demon that doesn't like her magazine choices, Sam said, pursing his lips to hide a smile. Bruce looked up at the ceiling. Hey, Friday, is there anyone dangerous and or invisible in this room? And did you see Scott turn tiny a second ago? I've been sitting next to you the whole time. There is nobody invisible and or dangerous in this room. The only forms of life I am detecting are those I am programmed to trust, Friday replied over Scott and Clint. Friday, can you detect ghosts? Sam asked, dramatically stroking his chin. Steve laughed. Avengers Tower is not haunted. And how would you know whether or not that's true? Bucky asked in a jokingly menacing stage whisper. Why would you immediately assume this is paranormal? Natasha leaned forward in her chair. There was a playful smile toying at the edge of her lips. Tony could easily whip up a machine to make things move seemingly by themselves. She turned to Tony. If I would have known you were planning this, I could have helped you pull it off. You know, plant the ideas in their heads without them realising. Tony shook his head, putting his hands up in surrender. I didn't build anything for a prank. Oh, I see, Thor smiled. You didn't, but maybe someone else did. Natasha and Thor looked at each other with identical smirks. Tony looked at all of them with a pitying expression. You're the Avengers. I seem to remember worse enemies than a couple flying magazines. I don't understand why this is such a big deal. Peter raised his eyebrows and looked back to the coffee table. He swiped at the first thing he saw, a candle that he had accidentally left at the tower, and let it drop to the floor. The glass broke between the hard, slick floor and the soft candle wax with a dull crunch. Tony looked down in surprise. After a moment of everyone staring at the candle, he shrugged. So maybe we're also up against a candle. Would you like me to go get something to melt it with to ease your fears? No, now I'm interested, Bruce said, looking down at the candle. If it's true that you aren't doing anything, and there's nobody else here, I know it's not really affecting us, but it's still interesting. Friday, are you able to lie to us? Friday answered, her voice soothing but loud. While I am capable of lying, I am only able to do so in situations that could be dangerous. What would you like to know? If Tony's lying about the prank. He does not show any signs of lying. Also, I am always surveilling this building, and he has never mentioned any prank on you or worked on any invisible inventions. All right, so it's settled, Sam said, slapping his leg. He looked around the room and shouted with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Ghost, if you are here, then slap Bucky on the back of his head. All the Avengers laughed and jumped up to move away from Bucky, except for Tony, who shook his head, smiling, and was already on the other side of the room, and Bucky, who rolled his eyes, crossed his arms, and waited with raised eyebrows. Peter jumped from the coffee table and raced through the Avengers, who watched with smiles and bated breaths. He took his place behind Bucky and watched the faces of his family as he swung his arm back, then forward again. His hand connected to the back of Bucky's head, and the sound echoed through the room as Bucky jumped and let a sound of surprise escape him. No way! Sam's jaw dropped. Tony scoffed. Please, that was obviously faked. Bucky stood up, still showing signs of shock. No, something definitely hit me. I did not fake that. Oh, we should call Dr. Strange, Scott said, turning to the group. He was invited, but he said he was busy dealing with some actual problems, Rhodey said, putting his hands in his pockets. Actual problems? Something about wizard mind controlling other wizards and making them misuse their magic. Tony turned and interrupted Clint before he could talk. No, there is not an invisible wizard here breaking my stuff and slapping Bucky. Clint raised his hands in surrender. Should we just leave it alone? Wanda asked, finally breaking the silence. Hey, I just realised. Bruce turned to her, a slight look of disappointment. You can move things with your magic. Yes, I can, but my magic is always visible. You always see the red when I'm doing anything. Bruce stood up straighter, looking a little happier. I think we should investigate more. Peter grimaced as Clint grinned and said, Uh-oh, ye ghost who lurks here, knock over that picture of Rhodey. So I guess we've just decided to wreck the common room? Tony asked, exasperated. He stood there for a minute, watching everyone nod, and then shrugged. All right. He turned with the rest of the group and looked at the small framed photo of Rhodey in his military uniform. Peter sighed and walked over to it. Even though he knew that they couldn't see him, he looked at them pointedly and pushed it over with only his pointer finger. As expected, all of them looked at each other, surprised but smiling. Peter threw his hands up in the air. "Is there any way to actually communicate with you?" "If we're going to actually do this, we should set up an actual system to communicate. How about the 1-tap, 2-tap system?" Steve asked, looking around the room. "Yes, thank you. Why did that take so long?" Peter said. "Okay, Mr. Ghost," Steve said, attempting at politeness. 1 knock for no, 2 knocks for yes. Does that sound good?" Peter eagerly knocked on the mantel, 2 dull thumps ringing through the room. The Avengers grinned at each other, not completely sure they could believe what was happening, but still excited. "Okay, so who wants to ask the first question?" Steve asked. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. If you've got this far, please consider subscribing. Have a lovely rest of your day.